The water in Alistair Finch's infinity pool was the color of a billionaire's dream, a shimmering, impossible turquoise that bled into the California sky. But dreams can drown. When Genevieve Dubois, Alistair's brilliant and beautiful partner, vanished after a vicious fight, he told police she just needed space. Days later, while the search was still on, the music at his estate was blasting. Champagne flowed as his new lover, Portia Montgomery, played hostess to a lavish pool party. It was a brazen spectacle of wealth and indifference, until the sirens cut through the laughter and police began to drain the water, searching for a truth everyone feared was at the bottom. The fight, like all their fights, had started over something small and ended with the world cracking open. It was a Tuesday night in the Oak Haven Hills, an enclave of obscene wealth and paranoid privacy, nestled in the canyons above Los Angeles. From their glass-walled fortress, Alistair Finch and Genevieve Dubois could watch the city glitter below like a carpet of fallen stars, a universe away from the silent, suffocating perfection of their lives. This time, the catalyst was a painting. Genevieve's painting. It was a chaotic swirl of deep indigos and violent slashes of crimson, a piece she'd titled Escape Velocity. Alistair, a man who built his empire on the clean, predictable lines of venture capitalism, hated it. "It's aggressive, Jen," he'd said, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. He wasn't looking at the canvas, but at its reflection in the panoramic window, as if the art itself was too unrefined for his direct gaze. "It doesn't match the aesthetic." "It's not supposed to match the aesthetic." Alistair, Genevieve replied, her voice low and tight. She was wiping her turpentine-stained hands on a rag, her slender frame tense. At 34, she still possessed the fiery spirit of the art student he'd met a decade ago, but it was banked now, smothered under layers of couture and compromise. It's supposed to feel something, and what it feels is chaotic, uncontrolled. He finally turned to her, his smile not reaching the cold calculation in his gray eyes. It was the smile he used on corporate boards before a hostile takeover. "I've invited the board of Arion Dynamics for dinner on Friday. I was thinking we'd hang the Rothko in its place. It's more conducive to billion-dollar conversations." The condescension was a physical blow. The Rothko wasn't a Rothko. It was his Rothko, an investment. Her painting was her soul, and he wanted to replace it with a balance sheet. "No," she said the word, a small hard stone in the vast minimalist space. Alistair's smile tightened. No, it stays. The board can look at it and feel something for once in their lives." That was the spark. The argument that followed was a well-rehearsed tragedy. It spiraled from the painting to her lack of gratitude to his obsession with control to her friends he deemed unworthy to the woman he was seeing on the side, a sleek, ambitious lawyer named Portia Montgomery, whom everyone knew about but no one dared mention. Genevieve had thrown that name into the air, and it had hung there, a poisonous vapor. "Don't you dare!" Alistair had warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He took a step closer, his 6'3" frame eclipsing her. "Don't you dare bring her into this house." "She's already in this house," Genevieve had screamed, her voice finally breaking. "She's in our bed. She's in your head. She's in every single lie you tell me when you come home smelling of a perfume that isn't mine." The final ugly words were swallowed by the slamming of the solid oak studio door. Genevieve had stormed out, grabbing only her car keys and her worn leather handbag. Alistair, left alone in the cavernous living room, had watched the taillights of her vintage convertible snake down their private mile-long driveway until they were just another pair of red dots swallowed by the city's glow. He took a sip of his scotch, straightened his tie, and went to bed. He called the police 48 hours later. Detective Marcus Thorne felt a prickle of disdain the moment he stepped into the Finch estate. It wasn't just the opulence, the soaring ceilings, the museum-quality furniture, the sheer audacious scale of it all. It was the sterility. The house felt less like a home and more like a high-end showroom where no one was allowed to touch anything. Alistair Finch was the picture of concerned distress. He was dressed in a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, his salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed. He wrung his hands at the appropriate moments, and his voice was thick with what sounded to the untrained ear like fear. "We had a quarrel," Alistair explained, seated on a white sofa that probably cost more than Thorne's car. "A stupid argument. She's passionate, you see. An artist. She gets overwhelmed. She's done this before. Takes off for a day or two to clear her head. Stays with a friend in Topanga, maybe gets a hotel by the beach." "And you have the names of these friends?" Thorne asked, his pen poised over his notepad. His partner, Detective Kim Holloway, a sharp woman half his age, was already scanning the room, her eyes missing nothing. Alistair waved a dismissive hand. "A few. I can have my assistant compile a list. But honestly, Detective, she values her privacy, her independence. If she knew I'd called you, she'd be furious." He was trying to frame it as an overreaction, an invasion of her space, not a dereliction of his duty. "She left her phone," Holloway noted from across the room. She was standing by a marble countertop where a single iPhone sat stark and silent. Her wallet, too. Credit cards, ID. The only thing missing is her handbag and the car keys. Thorne looked at Alistair. "Is that normal, Mr. Finch? For her to leave with no phone, no money?" Alistair's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, the only crack in his polished veneer. "She can be impulsive. She likely has cash in her bag. She's an old soul like that." Thorne made a note. Impulsive. He looked around the vast, silent house. "You said she drove off. We've put an APB out on her vehicle, a 1968 Mercedes 280 SL convertible silver blue." "Correct. Yes, that's her baby," Alistair said with a sad, fond smile that felt utterly rehearsed. "And you haven't heard from her at all? No texts, no calls, no cryptic emails? Nothing. The silence is deafening." Thorne stood up, his gaze drifting past Alistair through the floor-to-ceiling windows to the backyard. It was a masterpiece of landscape architecture, manicured lawns, and outdoor kitchen that rivaled most professional restaurants in the pool. The infinity pool was the centerpiece, a sheet of turquoise silk that seemed to pour directly into the canyon below. It was serene. "Perfect. We'll do everything we can." Mr. Finch, Thorne said, his tone professional, betraying none of his internal suspicions. "We'll check with the friends, monitor her bank accounts for any activity. Oh, wait, you said her wallet is here. We'll keep an eye out for the car. In the meantime, if she contacts you, you call us immediately." "Of course, Detective. Thank you for your time." Alistair walked them to the door, a gracious host seeing off his guests. As they walked back to their unmarked sedan, Holloway broke the silence. "He's lying." "I know," Thorne said, starting the engine. "The question isn't whether he's lying. It's what he's lying about." Over the next 5 days, the disappearance of Genevieve Dubois became a minor story in the relentless Los Angeles news cycle. Artist partner of venture capitalist Alistair Finch missing. Her photo was everywhere, a candid shot from a gallery opening, her smile wide and genuine, her eyes sparkling with a light that seemed absent from the cold, sterile house she shared with him. Friends were interviewed. They all said the same thing: Jen was unhappy. Jen felt trapped. Jen was terrified of Alistair's temper. One friend, a sculptor named Maya, told Thorne that Genevieve had a secret bank account, a runaway fund, but a check of her financials showed it hadn't been touched in months. The car was found on day 4. It was parked legally on a quiet residential street in Venice Beach, miles from her usual haunts. It was clean. No signs of a struggle. Her handbag was on the passenger seat. Inside was a book of poetry and a half-eaten bar of dark chocolate. No cash, no keys, just the bag. Keys. Just. The discovery of the car without a body should have been a sign of hope, but to Detective Thorne it felt like a prop carefully placed on a stage. And then on Saturday, exactly 1 week after Genevieve Dubois had vanished into the night, the music started pumping from the Oak Haven Hills. Thorne got the call from a furious neighbor, a film producer whose own weekend tranquility was being shattered by the thumping bass. "You won't believe this," the producer had seethed over the phone. "The man's wife is missing, maybe dead, and he's throwing a goddamn rave." Thorne and Holloway drove back up the winding canyon road, not towards a crime scene, but towards a party. It was a vision of grotesque denial. Cars, Porsches, Bentleys, Teslas lined the private drive. Laughter and shrill voices echoed in the twilight air. As they approached the house, they could see the backyard. It was packed. Dozens of people, the young, beautiful, and wealthy of L.A., milled around the pool. Waiters in crisp white jackets served champagne. And in the center of it all, holding court like a king, was Alistair Finch. By his side, her hand resting possessively on his arm, was a stunning woman with raven black hair and a shark's smile. Portia Montgomery. She looked perfectly at home. Thorne felt a cold knot of anger tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just arrogance. This was a statement. This was a man so convinced of his own power that he believed he was untouchable. He looked at the pool, the water glowing under the submerged lights, its surface disturbed by the joyful splashing of intoxicated guests. He thought of the missing woman, the fake smile of her partner, the car left like a breadcrumb. Something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. And Thorne had a sickening feeling that the answer was somewhere in that shimmering turquoise water. The music didn't just play. It pulsed. A deep synthetic heartbeat that vibrated through the flagstone patio, up through the soles of Detective Thorne's sensible shoes, and into his teeth. It was a soundtrack for oblivion, a frantic attempt to blast away any creeping sense of reality. As Thorne and Holloway walked through the wide-open glass doors into the backyard, a wave of expensive perfume and champagne-scented air washed over them. Young men in designer shirts that were artfully unbuttoned stood in tight clusters with women whose faces were smooth, emotionless masks of Botox and ambition. They laughed too loudly, their eyes darting around, constantly assessing who was watching them, who they should be talking to. It was a gathering of people who treated life as a transaction, and Genevieve's disappearance was just a piece of unfortunate market volatility. Alistair saw them coming. He was holding a champagne flute, leaning against the marble edge of the outdoor bar. Portia Montgomery was at his side, her red dress a slash of defiance against the cool blues and whites of the party's aesthetic. She whispered something in his ear, and his expression shifted from convivial host to irritated monarch. He met the detectives halfway, a practiced smile of annoyance on his face. "Detectives, to what do I owe the pleasure? Did you find her? Is that why you're interrupting my gathering?" The choice of the word gathering was deliberate, an attempt to downplay the bacchanalian scene unfolding behind him. "No, Mr. Finch, we haven't found her," Thorne said, his voice flat and unimpressed. He let his gaze sweep over the partygoers, many of whom were now staring, their conversations faltering. "We're here because we received a complaint. And frankly, we're surprised. A man whose partner is the subject of a major missing persons investigation doesn't usually throw a party a week later." Alistair let out a short, humorless laugh. "This isn't a party, detective. It's a remembrance. A celebration of Genevieve's vibrant spirit. She wouldn't want us to sit around moping. She loved life. She loved people." It was the most audacious, self-serving lie Thorne had ever heard. He glanced at Portia, who stepped forward, her smile as sharp as broken glass. "Alistair was devastated, detective," she said, her voice a low, purring contralto. "I simply couldn't let him wallow in grief. We all process loss in our own way. Alistair is a man of action, of forward momentum. Staying positive, staying surrounded by life, it's how he copes." She placed her hand on Alistair's chest, a gesture of both support and ownership. "I see," Holloway said, her tone dripping with skepticism. "And you are Portia Montgomery?" "A friend of the family," she answered smoothly. The friend of the family, currently wearing a diamond necklace that belonged to the missing woman, Thorne thought. He'd seen the necklace in photos of Genevieve from a charity gala months earlier. It was a distinctive piece, a cascade of white gold and diamonds that he was sure hadn't been a gift to Ms. Montgomery. The brazenness was breathtaking. "Mr. Finch, we need to ask you and Ms. Montgomery to come down to the station to answer some more questions," Thorne stated, changing tactics. "There are inconsistencies in your timeline that need clarification." Alistair's face darkened. The mask of the gracious host slipped, revealing the tyrant beneath. "That's not going to happen. Not tonight. My lawyer has advised me not to speak further without him present. I've told you everything I know. This is harassment." "Is it?" Thorne challenged, taking a step closer, lowering his voice so only the three of them could hear. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a man who couldn't wait to replace his missing partner. It looks like a man celebrating his newfound freedom." Alistair's eyes blazed with fury. "You are on my private property. I'm asking you to leave. Now." "We'll leave," Thorne said calmly. "But we'll be back." He looked past Alistair, his eyes settling on the pool. The setting sun cast long shadows across the water. The turquoise surface, once so inviting, now looked dark and secretive. "We just need to make a stop at a judge's house first." Portia's perfectly sculpted composure flickered. A knot of anxiety tightened in her expression. "A judge? For what? A warrant?" Holloway supplied her gaze, locking onto Portia. "A warrant to search this entire property. Every room, every closet, every inch of the grounds." She paused, letting the weight of her next words land. "And to drain the pool." The silence that fell between them was more profound than the thumping music. Alistair's face went rigid. It wasn't the explosive anger Thorne had expected, but something colder, more terrifying. It was the look of a man whose meticulous calculations had just been thrown into chaos by an unpredictable variable. "You have no grounds," Alistair hissed. "I have a missing woman who left behind her phone and wallet," Thorne countered, ticking the points off on his fingers. "A car abandoned miles from her home. A partner with a history of a volatile temper, according to friends. A brand new girlfriend wearing what appears to be the missing woman's jewelry. And a party that looks a hell of a lot like a victory celebration. I think a judge will find that more than sufficient grounds for probable cause." Portia's hand, still on Alistair's chest, was trembling slightly. Her eyes were wide with a fear she could no longer conceal. She looked from Alistair to Thorne, then at the enormous, glittering pool behind them. The laughter of the guests suddenly sounded shrill and distant, like ghosts at a feast. Alistair Finch, the man who controlled boardrooms and markets and people, was no longer in control of his own home. He stared at Thorne, his mind clearly racing, cycling through threats, bribes, and legal maneuvers. But he could see the implacable resolve in the detective's eyes. This wasn't a negotiation. "Get out," Alistair said again, but this time the words lacked their earlier force. They were brittle, desperate. "We're going," Thorne confirmed. He turned his back on them, a deliberate act of dismissal. "But we'll see you again in a few hours, Mr. Finch. Don't go anywhere." As he and Holloway walked away, the music seemed to falter. A DJ, sensing the shift in mood, faded the track. The vibrant, pulsating heart of the party was slowing, dying. The chatter of the crowd devolved into nervous whispers. All eyes were on Alistair and Portia, who stood frozen by the bar, illuminated in the cold, unforgiving light of the approaching dusk. The party was over. Driving back down the canyon, Holloway broke the silence. "The necklace. You really think it was hers? I'd bet my pension on it." Thorne said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "He didn't just replace her. He's re-gifting her life." He felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Alistair's arrogance was going to be his downfall. He had handed them the justification they needed on a silver platter served with champagne and contempt. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that they weren't just searching for a missing person anymore. When they returned and when the water level in that perfect turquoise pool began to drop, they were going to find a body. He was sure of it. The only question left was whose. Night had fully descended by the time the caravan of official vehicles returned to the Finch estate. The transition was jarring. The last of the party guests, a confused and disgruntled herd of socialites, were still filing out their expensive cars, forming a reluctant exodus down the long driveway. They were replaced by the stark, impersonal presence of the LAPD 2 marked patrol cars, the detective's sedan, and a large, unmarked van from the Forensic Services Unit. The house moments before a stage for defiant celebration was now a crime scene. Yellow tape, stark and clinical, was being unspooled, cordoning off the entire backyard. The festive string lights that hung over the patio now cast a sickly, interrogative glow on the uniforms and serious faces of the officers. Alistair Finch and Portia Montgomery stood in the cavernous living room framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the methodical invasion. Alistair was on the phone, his voice a low, furious growl. He was talking to his lawyer, a man whose name was synonymous with getting the rich and powerful out of trouble. Portia stood rigidly beside him, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist. The defiant fire in her eyes had been replaced by a brittle, flickering panic. The diamond necklace was gone from her throat, likely tucked away in a desperate, belated act of discretion. Detective Thorne presented the signed warrant to Alistair, who snatched it from his hand without a word. As Alistair scanned the document, his knuckles white. Thorne's attention was already outside. A heavy-duty pump was being unloaded from the forensic van, its thick hoses snaking across the manicured lawn towards the edge of the infinity pool. "You're really going to do this?" Portia's voice was barely a whisper. "You're going to tear this place apart based on a feeling we're going to follow the evidence," Ms. Montgomery Holloway corrected her coolly, "or the lack thereof. A missing woman of her means doesn't just fall off the face of the earth without leaving a digital or financial footprint. Her entire life just stopped. Right here." Holloway's gaze drifted toward the dark water. The pump coughed to life with a loud industrial roar, shattering the canyon's silence. It was a sound of finality. A large hose submerged with a splash and water began to churn near the surface, before being sucked away, carried by another hose to a drain-off point down the hillside. The draining of the Finch pool had begun. The process was agonizingly slow. The pool was immense, holding tens of thousands of gallons of water. For the first hour, the change was almost imperceptible. The water level dropped by mere inches, the turquoise surface still placid and undisturbed under the glare of portable floodlights that the forensic team had set up. Thorne used the time to direct a preliminary search of the house. Officers, gloved and methodical, began in Genevieve's art studio. It was a space that felt distinctly different from the rest of the house. It was messy, vibrant, and alive. Canvases in various states of completion were stacked against the walls. Jars bristling with brushes stood on paint-spattered tables. And there, on the central easel, was Escape Velocity, the painting that had started the final fight. In the harsh light of the police flashlights, the slashes of crimson looked like fresh wounds. Holloway found something tucked into the frame of a large, empty canvas. It was a small, folded piece of paper. A receipt. Not for art supplies, but for a burner phone purchased with cash 2 weeks before Genevieve disappeared. "Our old soul was getting modern," Holloway murmured, bagging the receipt. Meanwhile, outside the pool continued to drain. The water level was noticeably lower now, exposing a line of pristine white tile that had been submerged. The top steps of the shallow end emerged glistening and bare. With every inch the water receded, the tension on the patio tightened like a screw. Alistair had ended his phone call and now stood with Portia and a newly arrived grim-faced lawyer in a tailored suit. They watched the proceedings with a mixture of contempt and terror. Thorne stood at the edge of the deep end, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the water, as if he could will it to reveal its secrets. Every bubble that rose to the surface, every ripple from the pump's vibration made his heart kick. He had staked his professional judgment on this. He had pushed for the warrant, convincing a skeptical judge that this flamboyant act of denial by Finch was more than just poor taste. It was the cover-up of a crime. If they found nothing, his credibility would be shot, and Alistair's lawyers would have a field day with a harassment lawsuit. 2 hours became 3. The water was now halfway down. The sleek built-in loungers in the shallow end were fully exposed, looking like skeletal remains. The pool's submerged lights began to poke through the surface, casting eerie upward-facing beams into the night sky. The roar of the pump was a constant mechanical drone. One of the uniformed officers pointed. "Detective, look!" Thorne followed his gaze. Something was becoming visible in the deepest part of the pool, directly below the diving board. At first it was just a dark amorphous shape against the pool's light blue floor. As the water level sank lower, the shape began to resolve. It was large, dark, and irregular. Alistair took an involuntary step forward, his lawyer putting a restraining hand on his arm. Portia let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. The pump kept roaring. The water receded further. The shape became clearer. It wasn't soft. It wasn't a body wrapped in a tarp as Thorne had morbidly pictured. It was hard-edged metallic. And then a recognizable form emerged from the distorting lens of the remaining water. It was the corner of something large and rectangular. It was covered in a dark, heavy-duty canvas, crudely weighted down by several large decorative stones that Thorne recognized from the landscaped garden beds nearby. The forensic team leader, a man named Diaz, gave the signal. The pump was shut off. The sudden deafening silence was more jarring than the noise. In that silence, all that could be heard was the distant hum of the city and the frantic pounding of Thorne's own heart. Two officers, wearing waterproof waders, carefully descended the pool steps and sloshed through the knee-deep water towards the object. The water lapped against the sides of the canvas-covered shape. Thorne held his breath. This was it, the moment of truth. One of the officers reached the object, his gloved hands hesitating for a moment before gripping a corner of the heavy, wet canvas. He looked back at Thorne, who gave a sharp, decisive nod. With a deep breath, the officer pulled. The canvas, heavy with water, peeled back with a sucking sound. The floodlights hit the exposed surface. It wasn't the pale, tragic face of Genevieve Dubois. It was the deep, violent indigo and brutal crimson slashes of her painting, Escape Velocity. And submerged beneath it, pinned to the floor of the pool, was something else entirely. It was a man. Dressed in a dark security guard's uniform, his eyes wide open in a permanent state of surprise, a neat, unmistakable bullet hole in the center of his chest. The discovery of the body in the pool didn't just change the investigation, it detonated it. The man was quickly identified as Frank Miller, a 58-year-old retired cop who worked for the high-end security firm that patrolled Oak Haven Hills. He was the guard on duty the night Genevieve disappeared. His logbook, found in the security booth at the entrance to the private road, showed he'd checked in Alistair Finch upon his return earlier that evening. The last entry was at 10:15 p.m., a routine, all clear. Genevieve had stormed out around 11:00 p.m. The cause of death was obvious even before the coroner's report. He had been shot. The pool wasn't just a hiding place, it was a tomb, and Genevieve's painting her soul on canvas had been used as a shroud. The question that hung in the cold night air was as chilling as it was confounding. Where was Genevieve Dubois? And how did a security guard end up shot dead at the bottom of her swimming pool? Alistair Finch's composure finally catastrophically shattered. When Thorne confronted him with the identity of the dead man, Alistair's face went slack with what looked like genuine shock. Frank. Dead. No. No, that's impossible, he stammered, his eyes wide. He was a good man. He worked here for years. He was on duty the night Genevieve left. Thorne said, his voice like ice. And now he's dead in your pool and she's gone. You're going to have to do a lot better than impossible, Mr. Finch. Alistair, Portia, and their lawyer were immediately separated and taken downtown. The house was now under the full control of the forensics team. They worked through the night, the property glowing under the floodlights like a film set for a horror movie. The preliminary findings were baffling. The bullet that killed Frank Miller was from a .22 caliber pistol, a small, easily concealable weapon. A search of the house revealed Alistair owned several firearms, all large-caliber hunting rifles and shotguns, all locked securely in a gun safe to which he alone knew the combination. There was no .22 registered to him or Genevieve. The painting Escape Velocity was carefully lifted from the pool. Beneath it, the forensics team found a single shell casing. But something else lay near the body, partially hidden by one of the victim's hands. It was a small silver object tarnished by the chlorinated water. A key, Not a car key or a house key, but a small, old-fashioned skeleton key. In a sterile interrogation room under the hum of fluorescent lights, Portia Montgomery's carefully constructed facade crumbled into a million pieces. Faced with a potential accessory to murder charge, her loyalty to Alistair evaporated. "I didn't know anything about a body," she insisted, her voice trembling. "Alistair told me Genevieve just left. He said she was unstable, that she'd had a breakdown." "And the party?" Holloway asked, her voice deceptively soft. "Whose idea was that?" Portia sobbed, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. "His. It was all his idea. He said it was the best way to control the narrative. To show everyone he wasn't worried that he was the wronged party. He said if he acted like a victim, the press would eat him alive, but if he acted like he was moving on, they'd just call him a cad and focus on finding her." "And the necklace?" Holloway pressed. "He gave it to me that afternoon," Portia admitted, her voice dropping to a shameful whisper. "He said Genevieve had left it behind, and that she didn't deserve to wear it anyway. He said it looked better on me. I was a fool. I know I was a fool." Alistair, in a separate room with Thorne and his lawyer, was a wall of furious denial. He claimed he had no idea how Frank Miller ended up in his pool. He stuck to his story. Genevieve had stormed out after their fight, and he hadn't seen her since. The party was, as he'd claimed, a way to project strength. "So you're saying an armed security guard was shot on your property, dragged to your pool, and dumped in all without you hearing a thing?" Thorne asked, incredulous. "This house is soundproofed. I was in my bedroom on the other side of the estate. I took a sleeping pill. I heard nothing." Alistair spat back. "And the painting? Why use her painting to hide the body?" Alistair's eyes flickered for a moment. "I have no idea. Maybe the killer hated her art as much as I did." The callousness of the remark was chilling. The investigation was now a Gordian knot. They had a victim, a murder weapon they couldn't find, and a prime suspect who was either a Machiavellian genius or the unluckiest man in the world. And they still had a missing woman. Was Genevieve a second victim, her body dumped elsewhere? Or was she somehow the killer? The idea seemed preposterous. But the burner phone receipt suggested she was planning something. The breakthrough came from the one person who knew Genevieve's soul better than anyone, her friend the sculptor Maya. When Thorne and Holloway visited her studio in Topanga Canyon, a chaotic, welcoming space that smelled of clay and incense, she was pale with grief and fear. They showed her a photo of the skeleton key found in the pool. Her eyes widened. "I've seen it before," she said, her voice trembling. "Jen wore it on a thin silver chain around her neck. She never took it off. She said it was her escape key." "Escape from what?" Holloway asked. Maya hesitated, twisting a piece of clay in her hands. "From him. From Alistair. It wasn't just a metaphor. It was a real key." She led them to a large, abstract metal sculpture in the corner of her studio. She pointed to a small, almost invisible seam near the base. "She was a genius, you know. Not just with paint. With everything." Maya worked her fingers into the seam and pulled. A small, perfectly concealed door swung open. Inside the hollow base of the sculpture was a small metal lockbox. Maya looked at the detectives. "She told me if anything ever happened to her, if she ever disappeared, and I felt in my gut that something was wrong, I should open this. She said the key was the one thing Alistair could never take from her." Holloway took the skeleton key, which had been carefully cleaned and bagged, and inserted it into the lock. It turned with a soft metallic click. She lifted the lid. Inside there was no confession, no diary, no smoking gun in the traditional sense. Instead, there was a stack of professionally printed credit cards and a pristine California driver's license. The photo was of Genevieve, but her hair was cut short and dyed a mousy brown. The name on the documents was not Genevieve Dubois. It was Amelia Shaw. Beneath the documents was a burner phone, the one from the receipt, and a thick file folder. Holloway opened it. It was filled with what looked like financial statements, offshore bank records, and encrypted transaction logs. They were all under Alistair's name, but they were for accounts his lawyers would swear didn't exist. It was a meticulously documented portfolio of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering detailing how Alistair Finch had built a significant portion of his legitimate empire on a foundation of pure crime. And tucked into the back of the folder was a single sheet of paper. On it, in Genevieve's elegant handwriting, was a list of names. The first name on the list was Frank Miller. Beside his name was a note. He knows. He helped him. He's the first one I need to talk to. Genevieve Dubois hadn't had a breakdown. She hadn't been kidnapped or killed. She had been building a case. She had been planning to burn Alistair's entire world to the ground. And on the night she vanished, she had gone to confront the first domino she intended to knock over. The only question was, what happened when she did? The contents of the lockbox turned the case on its head. Genevieve Dubois wasn't a victim in the way they had imagined. She was a meticulous, patient hunter who had been stalking her prey for months, perhaps years. The file on Alistair was a work of art in its own right, a masterpiece of corporate espionage conducted from inside the gilded cage he had built for her. Detective Thorne spread the documents across the large table in the precinct's main briefing room. "She wasn't running away," he said to his team, a new respect for the missing woman in his voice. "She was preparing for war." The file detailed a complex web of shell corporations, illegal wire transfers, and insider trading that implicated not just Alistair, but several members of his company's board, the same men he'd wanted to impress by taking down her painting. Genevieve had somehow gained access to his encrypted servers, his hidden ledgers. She had everything. The note about Frank Miller was the key. Why did she need to talk to him? What did he know? A deep dive into Miller's financials provided the answer. For the past 5 years, Miller had been receiving a monthly payment of $10,000 from a holding company that the file revealed was secretly controlled by Alistair. It wasn't a salary. It was a retainer. It was hush money. The focus of the investigation shifted from Alistair as a potential murderer to Alistair as the head of a criminal enterprise. And Portia Montgomery, the ambitious lawyer, was suddenly viewed in a new light. How much did she know? Was she just a mistress, or was she the consigliere? When Holloway confronted Portia with the new evidence, her composure, already fragile, completely disintegrated. She had been played just as much as everyone else. Offshore accounts fraud. She asked, her face pale with disbelief. No. Alistair is aggressive in business, but he's not a criminal. He's too smart for that. He's smart enough to have a bagman on his security detail. Holloway countered, sliding a copy of Frank Miller's bank statement across the table, and smart enough to get his girlfriend to host a party for him while a dead body decomposes in his pool. The question is, are you smart enough, Ms. Montgomery, to save yourself? Portia stared at the numbers, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. She had hitched her wagon to a man who wasn't just a philanderer, but a major felon. Her legal career, her reputation, her entire future was about to be incinerated. The night she left Portia, began her voice barely a whisper. Alistair called me. He was frantic. Not the cold, in-control man I knew. He was terrified. He said, "She knows. I don't know how, but she knows everything." He told me to come to the house, but to park down the street and come in through the back gate. What time was this? Around midnight. When I got there, he was in the backyard by the pool. He was drenched in sweat. He told me Genevieve had confronted him, that she had proof of business dealings. He said she threatened to ruin him. And then he said she just left. Did you believe him? Portia shook her head. No. There was something in his eyes. He kept looking at the pool. The pieces were beginning to fit, forming a dark and twisted picture. Thorne and Holloway theorized a new timeline. The fight over the painting was just the prelude. The real confrontation happened later. Genevieve, armed with her evidence, had finally shown Alistair her hand, telling him she was going to expose him. In his rage and panic, he had lashed out. But that didn't explain Frank Miller. The answer came from an unlikely source, a motion-activated security camera on the property of the film producer who had called in the noise complaint. His property overlooked the Finch estate from above. His cameras, designed to catch coyotes or intruders, had a clear if distant view of Alistair's backyard. The producer, eager to help nail his obnoxious neighbor, gladly handed over the footage. Thorne and Holloway watched the grainy black and white video in a darkened room. The timestamp in the corner of the screen provided an objective silent witness. At 11:05 p.m., they see Genevieve's Mercedes convertible driving away down the long driveway. Alistair's story so far held up. For the next hour, nothing. The patio is empty, the pool still. Then at 12:15 a.m., a figure walks into frame. It's a man in a security uniform, Frank Miller. He walks to the edge of the pool and peers down into the deep end as if looking for something. He has a flashlight in his hand. A few moments later, a second figure emerges from the house. Alistair. He approaches Miller, and though there's no audio, their body language is tense. They are arguing. Alistair points towards the driveway, then back at the house. Miller shakes his head. Then the video shows something that makes Thorne's blood run cold. A third figure appears. She slips out of the shadows near the art studio, a place the camera barely reaches. She is slight moving with a quiet grace. It's Genevieve Dubois. She hadn't left. She had sent her car away or had someone else drive it and circled back. She approaches the two men who have their backs to her. She is holding something small in her hand. There's a flash so brief it's almost missed, and Frank Miller crumples to the ground. Alistair spins around his face a mask of horror. He sees Genevieve holding a small pistol. She says something to him, her expression cold and resolute. He backs away, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The camera then shows Genevieve directing Alistair. He, looking utterly terrified of the woman he once dominated, helps her roll Miller's body onto a large canvas. The painting, and together under her armed supervision, they struggle to push the heavy shrouded corpse into the pool. It sinks slowly, grotesquely into the deep end. The final scene on the tape is the most chilling. Genevieve stands at the edge of the pool, the gun still in her hand. She looks at Alistair for a long moment, then turns and walks back into the shadows of the studio, disappearing from view. A few minutes later, Portia Montgomery appears, walking into a scene of a crime she didn't even know had been committed. Thorne leaned back in his chair, stunned. "My God," he whispered. "He wasn't lying. He is scared of her. He didn't kill anyone. He's an accessory." Holloway said, her voice grim. She made him help her cover it up. Genevieve Dubois wasn't a victim or a warrior for justice. She was a killer. She had gone there to confront Miller, her first domino, but the confrontation had turned deadly. She had executed him. And then she had implicated her husband in the crime, binding him to her not with love or law, but with a shared terrible secret. The party wasn't Alistair's idea of a celebration. It was an act of desperation, an attempt to create a veneer of normalcy over a foundation of terror, all under the direction of a woman who was now holding his entire life and his freedom in her hands. She hadn't vanished. She was hiding in plain sight, pulling the strings. And the police had no idea where she was. The video footage transformed Alistair Finch from a prime suspect into a hostage. When Thorne and Holloway confronted him with the tape, the relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost pathetic. His blustering, arrogant demeanor dissolved, replaced by the raw, unvarnished fear of a man who had been living in a nightmare. His confession, when it came, was a torrent of panicked words. "She was going to kill me," he said, his voice trembling in the interrogation room. His lawyer sat beside him, silent and grim, knowing the best legal strategy was now full, unadorned cooperation. After she shot Frank, she pointed the gun at me. She was so calm. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. It was like all the passion, all the anger, all the life had been boiled out of her, and all that was left was this cold purpose. He recounted the night's events from his perspective. The fight over the painting had been real, but it was just the surface. Later that evening, she had confronted him with the file. She laid out his entire criminal enterprise with chilling accuracy. She told me she didn't want the money, Alistair said, shaking his head in disbelief. She said she wanted to watch me lose everything. She wanted me to live the rest of my life with nothing. She said she was going to start with my accomplices, that she was going to dismantle my empire one person at a time, and she was going to make me watch. He confirmed she had arranged for a friend to drive her car to Venice to create a false trail while she hid in the studio waiting. Her target was Frank Miller. Why him? What did he do? Thorne asked. Alistair looked down at his hands. Years ago there was an incident. A business deal that went bad. Someone got hurt. A rival. Frank was on duty. He saw what happened. I paid him to keep quiet to make sure the official record was clean. Genevieve must have found the payment records. She knew Frank was my first sin. She said if she could make him talk, the rest would unravel. But Miller refused to talk. When Genevieve confronted him by the pool, he had laughed in her face, telling her Alistair's money was worth more than her threats. He had sealed his own fate. After she shot him, Alistair continued, she told me that this was the new arrangement, that I was now part of her plan. She made me help her hide the body. She said if I went to the police, she would produce a recording she'd made of me confessing to the murder. She said she'd tell them I killed Frank to silence him, and then she vanished, making it look like I had killed her too. It was my word against hers, and she had the gun. The next week had been torture. Genevieve was hiding somewhere in the vast house, moving silently through hidden passages and guest rooms he hadn't entered in years. She would appear at random, a ghost in her own home, to give him instructions. The call to the police, the script of what to say, even the party, it was all her idea. The party, Holloway asked, skeptical. She said it was a masterstroke. Alistair explained a flicker of his old admiration for cunning strategy in his eyes. She said no one would believe a grieving man would throw a party, so they wouldn't suspect he was being coerced. They would just think he was a monster. She wanted them to find the body. She wanted me to be the only one there, the obvious suspect. It was all designed to corner me, to make me so desperate I would have no choice but to do exactly what she said. Her plan was to use him, her puppet, to liquidate his illegal assets, transfer the clean money to an account of her choosing, and then she would disappear forever, leaving him to face the fallout from a murder he didn't commit, and a financial empire that was now a house of cards. The confession gave the police a clear picture of the killer, but they still didn't have her. The house was searched again, this time by a SWAT team from the wine cellar to the attic. They found a small makeshift living space in a forgotten staff suite in the basement, complete with blankets, bottled water, and energy bars. They also found a laptop wiped clean. But Genevieve was gone. She had slipped away while the house was being swarmed. They had Alistair's testimony, but it was the word of a compromised, terrified man. They needed Genevieve. They needed the murder weapon. The final piece of the puzzle came from Maya the sculptor. Racked with guilt, she called Thorne, her voice choked with tears. She called me, Maya cried. Jen called me from her burner phone. She's at the studio. My studio. She needs me to drive her to the airport. Stall her, Thorne commanded. Tell her you're on your way. Do not let her know you've talked to us. The raid on Maya's Topanga Canyon studio was silent and swift. Plainclothes officers surrounded the property, hidden amongst the eucalyptus trees and dense chaparral. Thorne and Holloway, wearing tactical vests, took the lead. They found her in the main workspace, standing next to the metal sculpture that had held her secrets. She was dressed in practical, anonymous clothing, jeans, a dark hoodie, a baseball cap pulled low over her mousy brown hair. The transformation from the glamorous artist to Amelia Shaw was complete. She held a small go bag in one hand. She didn't seem surprised to see them. She simply looked up, her face calm, her eyes holding a deep, weary sadness. She didn't run. It's over, isn't it? She said, her voice quiet. It is, Genevieve Holloway said softly. Genevieve looked at the sculpture, her hand resting on its cool metal surface. He took everything from me, she said, not to the detectives, but to the room, to the universe. my art, my spirit, my name. He tried to turn me into just another one of his possessions. I tried to build a case against him to do it the right way, but when I confronted Frank Miller and he just laughed, something broke. I realized the system Alistair owned would never convict him. To beat a monster, you have to become one. She then reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out the .22 caliber pistol. She didn't point it at them. Instead, she laid it carefully on a workbench next to a lump of clay. Her confession was in her surrender. As they cuffed her, Thorne looked at her, at the woman who had outplayed a master manipulator, who had committed murder with ice-cold precision, and who had orchestrated a week of pure psychological terror. He saw the artist, the victim, the strategist, and the killer all residing in one shattered soul. She had fought to escape the gilded cage, but in the end she had only managed to build a new one with bars made of iron and a sentence that would last a lifetime. The trial was a media circus, a lurid spectacle dubbed the Gilded Cage Killing by the press. It had everything: wealth, betrayal, and a murder captured on grainy surveillance footage. In exchange for his full testimony, Alistair Finch received a reduced sentence of 12 years for being an accessory to murder and for a litany of federal financial crimes. The man who once ruled a corporate empire from a glass fortress now spent his days in a concrete box. His company collapsed and his name a permanent synonym for ruin. Portia Montgomery, granted full immunity for her testimony, vanished from the public eye, her career derailed. Maya the sculptor was never charged and later created a powerful series of sculptures inspired by the events titled The Key and the Cage. Genevieve Dubois's defense tried to paint her as a victim of coercive control who finally snapped. But the jury saw the video, the cold calculation, the woman who had not just lost control, but taken it in the most final way possible. They found her guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, calling her actions a chilling perversion of justice, sentenced her to life in prison without parole. In the end, everyone lost. An innocent man was dead. Alistair lost his freedom, and Genevieve lost her soul. The house in Oakhaven Hills was sold, its infamous pool immediately filled in by the new owners. Sometimes Detective Thorne would drive through the canyons and think of Genevieve's words. To beat a monster, you have to become one. She had succeeded, but in the process created a tragedy far greater than the one she sought to escape. The story of Alistair Finch and Genevieve Dubois is a dark reminder that behind the shimmering facades of wealth and power, the human heart can be a very dark place. It's a story of how control can become abuse, how a cry for justice can become a quest for vengeance, and how the fight to escape one prison can lead you directly into another. They were both monsters locked in a dance of destruction, and their story ended the only way it could, in ruin. What did you think of this tragic story? Who do you think was the greater villain? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. 7 months pregnant. Emery Thorne was no longer the perfect accessory for her millionaire husband. Her crime, a 30-pound weight gain that came with nurturing his unborn child. His verdict, exile. As the cold wrought iron gates of their palatial New York estate slammed shut behind her, another woman was already stepping into her life, her shoes and her husband's private jet. This isn't just a story of unfathomable betrayal. It's the story of a woman left with nothing but the fierce protective love for her baby, a woman who decided that from the ashes of her perfect life, she wouldn't just rise, she would build an empire and take back everything. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was still always chilled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the way Damien Thorne liked it. It was an atmosphere that seemed to seep into the very bones of the place, a sterile perfection that mirrored its owner. From the outside, Damien and Emery Thorne were the city's golden couple. He, a self-made real estate magnate with a jawline as sharp as his business acumen and a portfolio that glittered with skyscrapers and luxury resorts. She, the beautiful, doe-eyed philanthropist whose grace and quiet elegance made her the perfect counterpart to his ambition. Their life was a meticulously curated series of events, galas at the Met Summers in the Hamptons, spontaneous shopping trips to Paris, and Christmases spent on the sun-drenched beaches of St. Bart's. They were regulars at restaurants like Per Se and Daniel, where their table was always waiting. Their world was one of bespoke suits, Hermes Birkin bags that Emery collected with the disinterest of a child collecting stamps and the constant subtle hum of the engine of their Rolls-Royce Phantom as it navigated the city streets. Damien didn't just like beautiful things, he demanded them. He saw his life as a brand, and every element within it, including his wife, had to be flawless. Emery had met Damien when she was a budding art historian consulting for a gallery he had acquired. He was captivated by her knowledge, her quiet confidence, and of course her willowy, Audrey Hepburn-like frame. He pursued her with the same single-minded intensity he applied to his business deals. He showered her with gifts, whisked her away on his jet, a sleek Gulfstream G650ER he'd christened the Titan, and made her believe she was the center of his universe. She fell in love not with the wealth, but with the man she thought he was: decisive, protective, and brilliant. They married in a lavish ceremony at the Oaxaca Castle on Long Island, a fairy tale event that was the talk of the society pages for months. For the first 3 years the fairy tale held. Emery learned to navigate his moods, his obsession with control, and his almost pathological need for order. She organized their homes, the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the Aspen chalet, with military precision. She hosted flawless dinner parties, charmed his business partners, and never ever had a hair out of place. She was in every sense Mrs. Damien Thorne, a perfect reflection of his success. The first hint of a crack in their gilded cage came with the 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. Emery was overjoyed. She had longed for a child, for a warmth to fill the sometimes lonely spaces of their cavernous homes. When she told Damien, he was initially ecstatic. A son and heir to the Thorne empire was the one acquisition he hadn't yet made. A boy, of course, he'd declared, pouring 2 glasses of vintage Dom Perignon, pushing one towards her before retracting it. "Oh, right. Not for you. We'll get you some sparkling cider. We'll have to plan the nursery. I want the best. Italian furniture, hand-painted murals. Nothing is too good for my son." The joy, however, was short-lived. It began to curdle as Emery's body began to change. The first trimester was a blur of morning sickness that left her pale and exhausted. Damien's patience wore thin. "Are you still sick?" he'd ask, his tone laced with annoyance as he fastened the cuff of his Richard Mille watch. "You need to get a handle on this, Emery. We have the Anderson charity benefit on Friday. You can't be seen looking so green." She tried. She forced down crackers, sipped ginger ale, and plastered a smile on her face for the cameras. But as she moved into her second trimester, the sickness subsided, and a new problem emerged: her appetite. For the first time in her life, Emery was truly hungry. The carefully controlled diet of salads and grilled fish that had maintained her size 0 figure was no longer enough. She craved pasta, bread, fruit, the very things Damien had always referred to as filler. And with the cravings came the weight. A gentle rounding of her belly at first, which Damien found novel. He'd place a proprietary hand on it at parties, a proud patriarch in waiting. But then her hips began to widen, her face lost its sharp, angular quality, and her breasts swelled. The comments started subtly. "Are you sure you need a second helping of that, darling? Think of the baby," he'd say, a charming smile playing on his lips that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. "Those trousers seem a bit snug. Perhaps we should have your stylist bring over some more accommodating pieces. Maternity wear. But something chic, of course." Emery tried to brush it off. Pregnancy was a natural process. Women gained weight. It was for their child, their son. But Damien's remarks grew more frequent, more pointed. He would watch her eat, his gaze critical, making her feel gluttonous and ashamed for nourishing his own child. One evening, as she was getting ready for a dinner at Jean-Georges, she stood before the full-length mirror in their dressing room. She was 5 months pregnant now, and a soft, undeniable bump pushed against the silk of her custom-made gown. She felt a surge of love for the life inside her, a fluttering kick that made her gasp with a quiet joy. Damien walked in, adjusting his bow tie. He stopped and stared at her reflection. His face, usually a mask of cool control, twisted into a look of genuine distaste. "My God, Emery," he said, the words sharp as shards of glass. "Look at you. You're letting yourself go completely." The joy she'd felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. "Damien, I'm pregnant. I'm supposed to gain weight. The doctor says I'm perfectly healthy." "I don't care what the doctor says," he snapped, walking over to her. He didn't touch her belly. Instead, he pinched the flesh at her waist. "This is just sloppy. I married a thoroughbred, not a broodmare. You have to maintain some standards." Tears pricked her eyes. "How can you say that? This is our baby. And you think our baby wants a mother who looks like this? You're an extension of me, Bella. When people look at you, they're looking at my judgment, my taste. And right now what I see is a lack of discipline." The words struck her with physical force. It wasn't about her health or the babies. It was about his image. She was a painting he had bought, and now in his eyes the canvas was warping. The next 2 months were a descent into a quiet, private hell. Damien put her on a strict diet monitored by their private chef. He scheduled mandatory sessions with a personal trainer who specialized in prenatal containment. He would weigh her not in the privacy of their bathroom but in the home gym, marking the number on a whiteboard as if she were a failing stock. Her weight gain slowed, but it didn't stop. She was growing a human being, and her body was doing what it was designed to do. But every pound was a new failure in Damien's eyes. He stopped touching her. The proprietary hand on her belly was gone. He slept on the far edge of their California king bed, a chasm of cold sheets between them. Their social life dwindled. He made excuses to attend events alone, claiming she needed her rest. In reality, Emery knew he was ashamed to be seen with her. The golden couple was tarnished. The isolation was suffocating. Their friends were his friends. Their world, his world. Who could she turn to? Admitting the truth that her billionaire husband was starving her, weighing her like livestock, felt insane. They would never believe it. They only saw the charming, successful Damien Thorne, the man who gifted hospitals and funded orphanages. They didn't see the tyrant who reigned within the pristine walls of their penthouse. She began to notice a new name appearing on his phone, a notification that would flash and be dismissed with a flick of his thumb: Amber. When she once casually asked who it was, he gave her a look that froze the question on her lips. "A business associate," he said curtly. "Don't pry." But Emery saw the late-night texts, the sly smiles he'd give his phone when he thought she wasn't looking. A quick search on Instagram revealed the truth. Amber Rayton was a model and influencer, all long limbs, surgically enhanced curves, and a permanently vacant pout. Her feed was a monument to narcissism: bikini shots in exotic locations, champagne glasses held in perfectly manicured hands, and captions filled with vapid pseudo-philosophy. She was everything Emery was not: brazen, artificial, and unapologetically transactional. And Emery noticed with a sinking heart, she was a size 00, the perfect unchanging accessory. Emery was now 7 months pregnant. She had gained 30 pounds, a number Damien recited with the same disgust he might use for a catastrophic business loss. The love she once felt for him had withered, replaced by fear and a growing, simmering resentment. She was no longer just fighting for her own dignity. She was fighting for the health of her unborn child. She started to sneak food, hiding granola bars in her closets and eating chocolate in the bathroom like a guilty teenager. The shame was immense, but the primal need to nourish her baby was stronger. The fairy tale was over. She was living in a beautiful, expensive cage with a keeper who was growing more monstrous by the day. She didn't know it yet, but the door to that cage was about to be flung open, not into freedom, but into a cold, unforgiving abyss. The breaking point arrived, as it so often does, under the glittering chandeliers of a public spectacle. It was the annual fundraising gala for the New York Children's Foundation, an event the Thornes had chaired for the past 2 years. This year, Damien had tried to get out of it. "You're in no condition to be seen, Emery," he'd stated, not asked, a week before the event. He was scrolling through stock reports on his tablet, not even bothering to look at her. She was sitting on the chaise lounge in their bedroom, her swollen ankles propped up on a pillow. "It's for the Children's Foundation, Damien," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm on the board. Not showing up would be a scandal. People will talk." "Let them talk," he scoffed. "Better they speculate than they see this." He made a vague, dismissive gesture in her direction. A spark of defiance long dormant ignited within her. "I'm going," she said, her voice firmer this time. "I have a dress. It's been tailored. I will look perfectly acceptable." Damien finally looked up from his tablet. His eyes narrowed into icy slits. "Fine," he hissed. "But if you embarrass me, Emery, I swear to you there will be consequences." The night of the gala, a palpable tension filled the penthouse. Emery had spent hours with her hair and makeup team who worked miracles to give her a radiant glow, artfully contouring her face to minimize the pregnancy-induced roundness. The dress was a deep emerald velvet custom designed by Oscar de la Renta's atelier to be both elegant and forgiving. It draped over her 7-month bump, a statement of regal motherhood rather than a concession to it. For a fleeting moment looking in the mirror, she felt a flicker of her old self, a woman of grace and power. The flicker died the moment Damien saw her. He walked out of his dressing room resplendent in a Tom Ford tuxedo and stopped dead. He didn't say a word. He simply let his eyes travel over her from her carefully coiffed hair down to the swell of her belly, and his lip curled in a silent sneer. It was more devastating than any insult he could have hurled. The ride to the Cipriani Ballroom on Wall Street was silent and cold. Emery stared out at the blurred city lights, her hand resting protectively on her stomach where her baby was kicking gently, oblivious to the storm brewing outside. They made their entrance to a flurry of camera flashes and fawning greetings. Damien slipped on his public mask with practiced ease. He smiled, shook hands, and placed a possessive arm around Emery's waist, pulling her close. To the outside world, they were the picture of a devoted, expectant couple. But Emery could feel the rigidity in his arm, the way his fingers dug into her side, a private signal of his displeasure. "Smile, darling," he whispered in her ear, his breath warm, but his words frigid. "You look like you're heading to a funeral." She forced her lips into a smile, her cheeks aching with the effort. They navigated the crowded room, a constellation of New York's elite. Women in couture gowns air-kissed her cheeks, their eyes darting to her stomach with a mixture of curiosity and pity. Emery had known these people for years, had sat on committees and planned charity auctions with them. Tonight she felt like a complete stranger, a specimen under a microscope. The first hour was a torturous performance. Emery managed to make small talk to discuss the Foundation's latest initiatives to graciously accept congratulations on the baby. But she was acutely aware of Damien's constant surveillance. When she reached for a canapé, a single harmless-looking bacon-wrapped date, his hand shot out and clamped around her wrist. "Remember your discipline, Emery," he murmured, his voice dangerously low. He smiled at a passing acquaintance. "My wife has been so careful with her diet. For the baby, you know." Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. She retracted her hand as if burned, her appetite vanishing completely. The true disaster began during the live auction. Damien, as the event chair, was on stage working the crowd with his signature brand of arrogant charm. Emery sat at their prime table near the front, flanked by a banking CEO and a shipping heiress. She felt a wave of dizziness, a consequence of her husband's enforced starvation diet, and reached for her water glass. Her phone sitting on the table buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. Normally she would have ignored it, but a strange compulsion made her pick it up. A new post from a user she didn't follow had tagged her. Her blood ran cold when she saw the username, @AmberRaytonOfficial. With a trembling finger she opened the post. It was a story. A fleeting video that would disappear in 24 hours but felt as permanent as a scar. Amber Rayton, the model from Damien's phone, was pouting at the camera. She was in what was unmistakably the back of a luxury car, the bespoke cream leather and polished wood trim of the Thorne family Rolls-Royce. The video was shot from a low angle showing off her cleavage in a tight, revealing dress. She didn't speak. She just winked, then panned the camera to the side. For a fraction of a second, the sleeve of a man's tuxedo came into view, a Tom Ford tuxedo identical to the one Damien was wearing on stage not 50 feet away. The caption was a single taunting word, soon. And tagged in the post were two accounts, @DamienThorne and @EmeryThorne. The air rushed out of Emery's lungs. This wasn't just an affair. This was a declaration of war. Amber hadn't just posted this for her followers. She had sent it directly to Emery, a digital poisoned arrow aimed straight at her heart in the middle of her husband's keynote event. The timing was malicious, designed for maximum impact, for maximum humiliation. It was a power play, a move to show Emery that she was being replaced and the woman replacing her was already in her car, in her life. Emery felt the room tilt. The auctioneer's voice, Damien's voice, the chatter of the crowd, it all faded into a dull roar. The woman next to her, the shipping heiress, glanced over. "Emery, dear, are you all right? You've gone white as a sheet." Emery couldn't answer. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back with a clatter that drew a few stares. She had to get out. She had to breathe. Turning her back on the stage where her husband was auctioning off a week-long stay at their St. Bart's villa, she fled. She stumbled through the labyrinthine corridors of the historic building, her velvet gown feeling like a lead weight. She found a deserted side exit and pushed it open, stepping out into the cold, damp night air of a lower Manhattan alleyway. The stench of garbage and stale beer was a grotesque contrast to the perfumed air of the ballroom. She leaned against the cold brick wall, gasping for air, her heart hammering against her ribs. Betrayal was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the audacity, the cruelty, the public nature of it all. This was a coordinated attack, and she knew with sickening certainty that Damien was a part of it. The tuxedo sleeve was no coincidence. Amber was his guest, hidden away somewhere waiting. Minutes later, the heavy door creaked open again. It was Damien. The charming mask was gone, replaced by a face contorted with pure fury. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" he spat, advancing on her. "You walk out in the middle of my speech. You make a scene. Do you have any idea how that looks?" Emery held up her phone, her hand shaking so violently she could barely hold it steady. She showed him Amber's post. "This Damien. This is what I'm doing. Who is she? And why is she in our car tagging me on social media?" He glanced at the phone and his expression didn't shift. There was no surprise, no denial, only cold, hard annoyance. "Her name is Amber," he said, as if explaining a tedious business detail. "And you are overreacting." "Overreacting?" Emery's voice cracked, a mixture of disbelief and hysteria. "She is publicly humiliating me, humiliating us, and you're letting her—" "She's a part of my life now, Emery," he said, his voice dropping to a chillingly calm tone. "It's time you accepted that. Look at you." He gestured to her body with open contempt. "You've become a liability, an embarrassment. You're emotional, you're bloated, you're not the woman I married." Each word was a hammer blow. "I am carrying your child," she shrieked, the sound echoing in the narrow alley. "Don't you dare use that as an excuse," he roared, his composure finally breaking. "You think that gives you a free pass to turn into this cow? I gave you everything, Emery, a perfect life, and all you had to do was maintain your end of the bargain. You had to be beautiful. You couldn't even do that." The raw, unfiltered cruelty of his words finally broke through her shock and grief, replacing it with a white-hot rage. "The bargain?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. "Was that the bargain, Damien? To be your pretty, silent, anorexic doll? To be an object on your shelf that you could discard the moment it showed a single imperfection?" "Yes," he shouted, his face inches from hers. "That was the bargain, and you broke it." He turned to go back inside. "Clean yourself up and get back to the table. We will discuss your future later." But Emery didn't move. The spell was broken. The man she had loved, the life she had lived, it was all a lie. A beautifully constructed, soul-crushing lie. She stared at the closed door, the muffled sounds of applause filtering through. He had gone back to his adoring crowd, leaving her in the filth of the alley. She was no longer just in a cage. She was being cast out of it. And as the first drops of a cold rain began to fall, she knew the discussion about her future would not be a negotiation. It would be a sentencing. The drive home was a silent tableau of impending doom. Damien sat in the front with the driver, his back ramrod straight, refusing to even acknowledge her presence. Emery huddled in the expansive back seat of the Rolls-Royce, the same car Amber had been in just hours before, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She felt contaminated, a trespasser in her own life. The plush leather seats seemed to mock her, a reminder of a world she no longer belonged to. When they arrived at their private elevator that led directly into the penthouse, Damien finally spoke. His voice was devoid of all emotion, flat and final. "Pack a bag," he said, not looking at her as he strode towards the bar and poured himself a large scotch. Emery stood frozen in the marble-floored foyer. "What are you talking about, Damien?" He took a long swallow of his drink before turning to face her. His eyes were as dead as a winter sky. "I am talking about the end of this. The end of us. I want you out. Tonight." The words hung in the sterile air. Out. Just like that. Her mind struggled to process the finality of it. Out. Where am I supposed to go? I'm 7 months pregnant with your child. You can't just throw me out on the street. A humorless laugh escaped his lips. Watch me. I can, and I will. You are no longer my wife, Emery. You are a problem I am solving. As for the child, he swirled the amber liquid in his glass. My lawyers will be in touch. I will of course provide for my son, but I will not have his mother be you, not like this. The sheer arrogance, the cold-blooded transactional nature of his decision was breathtaking. He was severing her from her life as cleanly as a surgeon excising a tumor. You can't do this, she whispered, tears finally streaming down her face, tracing paths through her expensive makeup. We have a life together. We have history. I love you. The last words came out as a desperate, pathetic plea, and she hated herself for it. No, he said, placing his glass down with a decisive click. You loved the life I gave you, and that life is over. You made your choice when you decided to let yourself fall apart. I'm making mine. He glanced at his watch. I have a car waiting downstairs in 30 minutes. Be in it, or my security will escort you out. He turned and walked into his study, closing the heavy oak doors behind him, the sound of the latch clicking into place like the door of a prison cell. Emery stood alone in the cavernous living room, surrounded by millions of dollars of art furniture and memories that now felt like props from a stranger's play. The shock was so profound it was almost paralyzing. 30 minutes. 30 minutes to dismantle a life, to pack away a future. She stumbled towards their bedroom, a magnificent suite with panoramic views of the park, the king-sized bed, the silk sheets, the walk-in closet the size of a small apartment. It was all part of the set. Her closet was a temple of couture, a rainbow of Chanel, Dior, and Valentino. Shoes she'd never worn, purses that cost more than a car. It was all meaningless. With numb fingers, she pulled out a single suitcase. What did one pack for an eviction? She grabbed a few simple, comfortable maternity dresses, a pair of flat shoes, her toiletries. She saw the emerald velvet gown from the gala crumpled on a chair, a sad, discarded symbol of her final humiliation. She left it there. Her eyes fell on the jewelry box on her vanity. Inside lay the breathtaking 10-carat diamond engagement ring Damien had placed on her finger, the sapphire necklace he'd given her for their first anniversary, the pearls, the emeralds. For a moment, a spiteful urge rose in her to sweep them all into her bag. They were worth a fortune. But the thought made her feel sick. They weren't gifts of love. They were investments, part of the price of owning her. She slammed the box shut. She would take nothing that tied her to him. Her hand went instead to a small, worn wooden box tucked away in a drawer. Inside was a handful of items that were truly hers. A locket with a picture of her parents, a faded postcard from her college study abroad trip to Florence, a small silver charm bracelet she'd had since she was a girl. These were the remnants of the woman she was before she became Mrs. Damien Thorne. She swept them into her handbag. As she zipped the suitcase, a wave of gut-wrenching sobs overtook her. She sank to the floor, her body shaking, her arms wrapped around her belly. It wasn't the loss of the wealth that broke her. It was the absolute annihilation of her reality. The man she had built a life with, the father of her child, had looked at her and seen nothing of value. He was discarding her as easily as he would a losing stock. A sharp knock on the bedroom door made her jump. It was one of Damien's security guards, a large, impassive man named Frank. "The car is ready, Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice polite but firm. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "It's just Emery now, Frank," she said, her voice raw. She pulled herself to her feet, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Dignity. It was the only thing she had left. She walked out of the bedroom, pulling her small suitcase, and didn't look back. The living room was empty. Damien didn't even afford her the courtesy of a final goodbye. He remained hidden in his study, a coward hiding behind his wealth and his power. Frank escorted her to the service elevator, the one used by staff and for deliveries. The symbolism was not lost on her. She had entered this life through the front door, a bride on her husband's arm. She was leaving it through the back, like trash being taken out. The car waiting in the underground garage wasn't one of Damien's luxury vehicles. It was a standard black town car. The driver, another face she didn't recognize, opened the door for her without a word. As she slid in, her phone buzzed again. Another Instagram notification. She couldn't stop herself. She had to look. It was Amber Rayton again. This time it wasn't a story. It was a permanent post on her grid. The picture was a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. Amber, clad in a tiny bright yellow bikini, was lounging on the plush cream-colored leather seats of a private jet. Her body was tan-toned and impossibly slender. One hand was draped languidly over her flat stomach, while the other held a flute of champagne. Behind her, through the circular window, the city lights of Manhattan twinkled like a distant, forgotten world. Anyone who had ever seen a picture of Damien Thorne knew his jet. It was unmistakably the Titan. But it was the caption that delivered the final fatal blow. Up, up and away, spontaneous trip to St. Bart's to celebrate a new beginning. Out with the old, in with the new. Upgraded, #life. Is good, #no baggage. The hashtag no baggage was a deliberate, vicious jab. It was a clear reference to Emery, to her emotional baggage, to the physical baggage of her pregnant body. Emery stared at the screen, a low guttural sound of pure anguish escaping her lips. The picture had been posted just minutes ago. While she was being thrown out into the street, her replacement was boarding her husband's jet, heading to their vacation home, toasting a future that was supposed to have been hers. Damien hadn't even waited for her to be gone. The betrayal was so swift, so complete, it was almost surreal. He hadn't just moved on. He had orchestrated a seamless, brutal transition, ensuring his life of perfection continued without so much as a moment's interruption. The car pulled out of the garage and into the rain-slicked streets of the city. Emery looked at her own reflection in the window. A pale, tear-streaked face, a woman with a single suitcase and a baby on the way, cast out into the night. Then she looked back down at the phone, at the image of the tanned, bikini-clad mistress in the private jet. The grief for a moment was a physical inferno threatening to consume her entirely. But then something else began to flicker in the embers. A tiny spark of something cold and hard and furious. He had called her a liability, an embarrassment, baggage. He had thrown her away. He had forgotten one crucial thing. This baggage he'd discarded had a heartbeat. Two, in fact. Her own and the strong, steady one of the child nestled inside her. And a mother's love she was beginning to realize could be the most dangerous force in the world. He had taken her life, but he had given her a reason to fight. And as the town car sped away into the darkness, leaving the glittering spire of her former home behind, Emery Thorne made a silent vow to her unborn child. They would be back, and they would not be asking for permission. They would be taking what was theirs. The war was not over. It had just begun. The first 24 hours were a free fall through a disorienting fog of despair and disbelief. The anonymous town car deposited Emery on the curb of a Harrison hotel in Midtown, a monument to beige functionality. The driver didn't help with her single suitcase. He simply popped the trunk and sped away, severing her final link to the world she once knew. The lobby was a sea of neutral tones, smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and the burnt coffee of weary travelers. It was clean, efficient, and utterly devoid of soul, a stark, brutal contrast to the bespoke floral arrangements and hushed elegance of her former home. Checking in felt like a surreal out-of-body experience. As the indifferent clerk tapped at his keyboard, Emery stared at her own reflection in the polished brass of the check-in counter. Her face was pale and puffy, her eyes raw from crying, her couture maternity dress now looking absurdly out of place. She gave her maiden name Emery Hayes, and the name felt foreign on her tongue, a ghost from a past life. She paid for a single night with the emergency visa she'd kept from her pre-Damien life, her fingers trembling as she slid it across the counter, praying it wouldn't be declined. The room was suffocatingly small. A queen bed with a stiff patterned duvet, a dark wood desk scarred with the rings of other people's glasses, and a single window that offered a dismal view of a soot-stained brick wall. The air was thick with a stale, recycled chill. This was it. This was the abyss. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress groaning under her weight, and the sheer totality of her fall from grace crashed down on her. Just last night she had slept on fret linens in a penthouse that floated above the city lights. Tonight her world had shrunk to this sterile 10 by 12-foot box. She was an exile, a non-person. Mrs. Thorne, the society hostess, the patron of the arts, the woman whose opinion on table settings was once breathlessly quoted in magazines, had been summarily executed. In her place was a 7 months pregnant woman with one suitcase, a dwindling bank account, and a future as blank and grim as the brick wall outside her window. Driven by a masochistic compulsion, she opened her phone. The screen glowed a portal to the life that was no longer hers. Amber Rayton's Instagram account was a vibrant, sun-drenched spectacle of cruelty. Each new post was a meticulously crafted torment. There was Amber laughing on the deck of Damien's yacht, the Tempest, the turquoise waters of St. Bart's sparkling behind her. Emery's heart seized. She and Damien had spent their second anniversary on that very yacht. There was Amber raising a glass of rosé at a table at Eden Rock, the caption, a gushing tribute to the most romantic dinner ever. That was Emery's favorite table, the one with the perfect view of the sunset over the bay. Damien had always made sure they had it. Then came the photo that made her physically sick. Amber posing for a selfie in what was clearly the master suite of the St. Bart's villa. Draped around her tanned, slender neck was a delicate vintage diamond necklace from Van Cleef & Arpels. A third anniversary gift. Emery had agonized over leaving it behind, and now here it was adorning the throat of her replacement. Damien hadn't just given it to her. He must have had it flown out specifically for her, a deliberate desecration of their shared history. The comments section was a dizzying mix of fawning praise and hungry speculation. You are living the dream. Who is this mystery billionaire spoiling you? A few astute followers tagged Damien, but the comments were quickly deleted, scrubbed clean by some unseen digital janitor. Then Emery saw it, a comment from a burner account, a faceless profile with 0 posts. Looks like he traded in a Rolls-Royce for a rental. Enjoy it while it lasts, sweetheart. Trophies get dusty. The comment was a tiny pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. Someone else saw it. Someone else knew. She screenshotted it just before it vanished, holding on to it like a talisman. Morning came, but with it no relief, only the cold, sharp edge of reality. Her phone buzzed, not with a call but with a text. It was from an unknown number, clinical and devoid of any human warmth. Your personal credit cards and associated bank accounts have been frozen effective immediately pending divorce proceedings. A monthly stipend of $5,000 for living and prenatal expenses will be deposited into a new account. Details to follow via post. Do not attempt to contact Mr. Thorne directly. All future communication must be directed through our office. Latham & Watkins, LLP. The message was a second eviction, a financial one. She opened her banking app and saw a string of zeros where a fortune had been the day before. She tried to purchase a bottle of water from the minibar using her Amex Centurion card, the black card that was a symbol of her status, and the transaction was as expected declined. The humiliation was absolute. $5,000 a month. It was a calculated cruelty, a pittance designed not for her survival, but for her subjugation. It was a leash long enough to prevent her from starving on the street where she might cause a scene, but short enough to ensure she could never mount a meaningful defense. It was control, pure and simple. Her first call was to her parents in Connecticut. Her mother's cheerful, "Hello," shattered into horrified silence as Emery, her voice cracking, recounted the nightmare of the past 48 hours. The words tumbled out: the gala, the alleyway, the Instagram posts, the cold final command to pack a bag. "That monster," her father seethed in the background. "I'm coming to get you right now. You're coming home, Bella." The offer of her childhood bed, of her mother's gentle care, was a powerful siren song. But as she looked at her reflection in the dark hotel room window, her hand resting on the firm swell of her belly, she knew she couldn't go back. To retreat to her parents' home would be to accept defeat, to regress into the role of the broken child. Her own child, this innocent life inside her, deserved a mother who was a fighter, not a refugee. "I can't, Dad," she said, her voice finding a sliver of strength. "I have to stay here, in New York. This is where it happened, and this is where I have to fix it." Her second call was to Chloe Devereaux. Chloe, a sharp-witted art dealer who had married into a notoriously stuffy old money family, had always been an ally, a fellow traveler in the gilded cages of Manhattan's elite. "Bella, my God, where are you?" Chloe's voice was a welcome balm of genuine concern. "Damien put out a story that you were ordered on complete bed rest for the rest of the pregnancy. I knew it was bull. He looked like a cat that swallowed a canary at the gala after you left." This time Emery didn't cry. She laid out the facts with a cold, clear precision that surprised even herself. The affair, the public humiliation, the eviction, the financial leash. When she finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy and dangerous. "That pathologically narcissistic son of a bitch." Chloe finally spat the words laced with venom. "I never trusted him. He always looked at you like he was assessing his portfolio. Okay, new plan. Where are you?" Emery told her the name of the hotel. "Absolutely not. You are not staying in some godforsaken tourist trap where the bed probably has a 5-star rating on Bedbug Advisor. I'm sending my driver Stefan. He'll be there in 20 minutes. Pack your bag. And for the love of God, Emery, get off Instagram. Stop drinking the poison he's serving." An hour later, Emery was stepping out of a discreet black SUV and into a different world. Chloe hadn't taken her to her own sprawling Park Avenue apartment, but to a charming private garden apartment on a tree-lined street in the West Village. It was a world away from the cold modernism of the penthouse. It had warm hardwood floors, overflowing bookshelves, and a cozy fireplace. A small private garden at the back was filled with pots of herbs and late-blooming roses. It felt like a home, not a showroom. "It's an investment property," Chloe explained, pulling Emery into a fierce, protective hug. "It's yours, for as long as you need it. No rent, no questions. Consider it a grant from the Women Scorned by Vile Billionaires Emergency Fund. Now," she said, leading Emery to a comfortable armchair. "First things first, we need a lawyer. Not one of the silk-stocking guys who plays golf with Damien's buddies. We need a shark. We need a woman who will fillet him and serve him for lunch." Chloe was a force of nature. By that afternoon, she had secured an appointment with Thea Pappas, a divorce attorney so legendary and so feared that her name was only ever spoken in hushed, reverent tones. Her nickname in the legal community was the Widowmaker, for her uncanny ability to leave powerful, arrogant men legally and financially bereft. The meeting was the next day. Emery, dressed in the most professional-looking maternity dress she owned, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Thea Pappas's office, in a sleek tower overlooking the Hudson, was the epitome of quiet, lethal power. No clutter, just clean lines, modern art, and a commanding view. Thea herself was in her late 50s with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing, a razor-sharp gray bob, and an aura of unshakable competence. She didn't offer fake sympathy. She offered Emery a glass of water and a comfortable chair. "Ms. Devereaux gave me the broad strokes," Thea began, her voice calm and measured. "But I need to hear it from you, from the beginning. Every detail, no matter how small or humiliating." Emery took a shaky breath. She started with the joy of her pregnancy, and then, her voice gaining a steely edge, she recounted the escalating cruelty, the weigh-ins, the dietary control, the constant criticism. She detailed the public humiliation at the gala, showing Thea the screenshots of Amber's taunting posts, the timestamp proof that her replacement was boarding the jet to St. Bart's while she was being thrown into the street. She finished with the lawyer's text, the financial guillotine. Thea listened without interruption. Her fingers steepled, her gaze intense. When Emery fell silent, the attorney leaned back in her high-backed leather chair. A slow, thin smile touched her lips. "He is breathtakingly arrogant," Thea said, a glint of battle in her eyes. "And in my line of work, arrogance is a gift. It makes men sloppy. It makes them predictable. This is very good for us." "Good?" Emery asked, her voice a whisper. "He has everything. All the power, the best lawyers. He's left me with nothing." "He hasn't left you with nothing," Thea corrected her, leaning forward. Her voice was soft but held the resonance of steel. "He's left you with his child, his heir. In the state of New York, a judge will take a very dim view of a man who evicts his pregnant wife, and he's left you with a narrative. The beautiful, supportive wife cast aside during the most vulnerable time of her life for a cheap affair. The public humiliation, the meticulously timed Instagram posts. This isn't just a divorce, Mrs. Thorne. This is a story. And we are going to seize control of that story." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a fragile tendril of hope unfurled in Emery's chest. "He wants to play dirty," Thea continued, her voice hardening. "He thinks he can use his power to silence you. We'll use his power against him. We file for divorce immediately. The grounds will be adultery and extreme mental cruelty. We subpoena everything, his and Ms. Rayton's phone records, text messages, emails. Travel manifests for the Gulf Stream. Credit card statements for the no-limit Amex he gave her. We will build an irrefutable timeline of this affair, proving it was a long-term calculated conspiracy to replace you. We will paint a picture of a monster so obsessed with his public image that he emotionally abused and starved his pregnant wife." Thea stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "He thinks he can buy your silence with $5,000 a month. He wants to drag this out, bleed you dry. We're going to make this divorce so public, so messy, and so financially catastrophic that his board of directors will get stomach ulcers. His shareholders will demand he settle. We are not aiming for a fair settlement, Emery. We are aiming for a punitive one. One that provides for you and your child for the rest of your lives, and makes Damien Thorne think twice before he ever treats another human being like a disposable asset." The weeks that followed were a strange dichotomy. In the quiet sanctuary of the West Village apartment, Emery began the slow, arduous process of healing. Guided by Chloe's fierce friendship, she found a therapist who specialized in trauma and emotional abuse. She joined a prenatal yoga studio nearby, feeling a sense of community with the other expectant mothers, their bodies all changing in beautiful, unique ways. She rediscovered the simple, grounding pleasure of cooking for herself, visiting the local farmer's market and finding joy in the vibrant colors of fresh produce a world away from the bland, restrictive diet Damien had enforced. She was slowly, carefully rediscovering Emery Hayes. Simultaneously, the legal war raged. Damien's high-powered lawyers at Latham & Watkins were every bit as aggressive as Thea had predicted. They filed motion after motion, trying to bury her team in paperwork. Their first settlement offer was a lump sum that wouldn't even cover the cost of the art in her old living room, contingent on a draconian non-disclosure agreement that would have forbidden her from ever speaking about her marriage. Thea Papa sent it back with a single handwritten note: "You can't be serious." Then came discovery. Thea's team of forensic accountants and investigators were relentless, and they found gold. Text messages between Damien and Amber that were more damning than Emery could have imagined. Damien complaining about the bloated liability and her endless whining. Amber and Damien openly joking about the perfect timing of the gala incident, planning it like a marketing campaign. They found receipts for the Miami condo for lavish gifts for secret vacations that had stretched back over a year. It was all there. Proof. The pain of reading it was immense, but it was overshadowed by a profound, clarifying vindication. She wasn't crazy. It was all real. Armed with this evidence, Thea's team began to fight back, not just in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Anonymous, carefully selected details were leaked to veteran gossip columnists. The narrative began to shift. The initial story of a billionaire trading up for a younger model was replaced by whispers of shocking cruelty. The phrase "abused his pregnant wife" began appearing in headlines. Amber Rayton, once the triumphant victor, found the comments on her Instagram feed turning from adoration to vitriol. Her carefully curated image was crumbling. Damien, accustomed to absolute control, was apoplectic. His clean, swift execution of his marriage had devolved into a bloody public war. His company's stock, once impervious, took a small but noticeable hit. The brand of Damien Thorne was becoming toxic. One cool autumn evening, as Emery was walking home from her yoga class, feeling a moment of genuine peace, she saw him. He was leaning against a black Mercedes parked just down the street from her apartment building, his face etched with a fury and exhaustion she had never seen before. Her breath caught, but the old fear was gone, replaced by a cold, steady calm. She continued walking, her hand resting on her belly. "Emery," he called out, his voice strained. "We need to talk." She didn't stop. "We have nothing to talk about, Damien. If you want to communicate, you can speak to my lawyer." He moved quickly, blocking her path and grabbing her arm. "This has gone too far. The leaks, the newspapers. You're trying to ruin me." She stopped and slowly looked down at his hand gripping her arm. Then she lifted her gaze to meet his. Her eyes were clear and direct. "You threw me out of our home while I was carrying your child," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "You allowed your mistress to publicly taunt and humiliate me. You cut me off financially and tried to erase me from my own life. Don't you dare talk to me about ruining people." His face fell, his arrogance momentarily punctured by the simple, unassailable truth of her words. She pulled her arm from his grasp with a finality that startled him. "You did this to yourself," she said, stepping around him. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go rest. It's what's best for your son." She walked into her building without looking back, leaving him standing alone on the darkening sidewalk. For the first time in his meticulously curated life, Damien Thorne looked utterly and completely defeated. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He had started a fire, certain she would be consumed by the flames. He had never once imagined that she would emerge from them, not burned but forged into something stronger than he could ever comprehend. Emery's journey from a discarded wife to a symbol of resilience captivated the city. Her story wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. It was a powerful testament to a woman's strength in the face of unimaginable cruelty and public humiliation. She transformed her pain into power, her despair into determination. While Damien's carefully constructed empire began to show deep, irreparable cracks under the weight of his own arrogance and the public scandal, Emery focused on building a new life, one of authenticity, strength, and most importantly, love for her soon-to-be-born child. Her fight was for more than just a settlement. It was for her identity, her future, and for the right to define her own worth beyond the shadow of a powerful man. What do you believe is the ultimate justice in a story like this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If Emery's story of strength and transformation resonated with you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner power. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss the fallout and the final chapter of this incredible real-life drama.